Hello students, welcome to IAS Academy. In this particular video, we are going to discuss and analyze the question that were asked in GS3 paper of UPSC Civil Services Mains this year. We are going to talk about the questions that was asked from the internal security challenges and disaster management. Total 5 questions were asked from these two topics. 2 questions were of 10 mark and 3 questions were of 15 mark. So first of all, if you look, the question is directly related to your syllabus where we have to understand about the cyber threats, how it can pose a challenge to the maintenance of internal security and public order of India. The question is that in the Indian context, explain how fake news and misinformation pose a threat to internal security as well as public order. Then second part of the question was discuss the salient features of amendments under the IT Intermediary Guideline in Digital Media Ethics Code Rules 2021. So to some extent a straightforward question, and a similar kind of questions they have asked in the previous year as well, talking about the threat of cyber security. Now how you could have address this particular question? So first of all, if you talk about the introduction part, introduction you have to explain that how fake news, right, fake news and misinformation can pose a threat. Now one good way of starting introduction, if you are able to recall and remember, is talk about the most recent event where such threat we have seen manifesting itself, right? So most recent event, for example. So you can talk about how misinformation that is spread when the Gulf crisis began, when the Strait of Hormuz crisis began, people began to hoard gas cylinders and all that because they feared that there would not be enough supply of LPG. And even though government tried to assuage the fear that we do not have critical deficiency now, still people went in the panic mode. To some extent that was due to the spread of masses, to some extent false masses on the social media platforms. So that could a good way for starting. Then we'll talk about it, how it poses a threat to the internal security and public order. So fake news and misinformation, when it is rampantly being spread across social media platforms, especially by using multiple channels you have these days, both in the form of text, audio, as well as sometime in the video form. So for example, if there is a circulation of a morphed image or video, this can directly threaten the security of India by stoking communal violence. Imagine that rumor mongering is going on, that can create panic in a particular section of society, particular community of the society, that they might be attacked by majority or the majority might be attacked by minority in that particular area. So that can be far from true, but it can create still a panic, a fear, and people can take a decision that they might later regret as such. Second we can talk about is the spread of misinformation is directly seen when you have the use of this particular you can say use of these medias by the terrorist groups and terrorist elements as such. So terrorist groups and terrorist elements can also use such information, mass fake news and misinformation, to create distrust or mistrust between the public and the government as such. People can start losing faith in their elected officials, in their elected representatives, the government appointed officials, and they might feel that government is taking some action that might go against the interest of public as such. So terrorist groups can use this as a way to create a kind of mistrust among the community and can use this particular situation to further radicalize the society, further recruit members to carry out some heinous acts and all that. That is the second effect we can see. Third, we can talk about, as you have seen, that whenever you have circulation of fake news, people can start panicking. An example we have seen in the case of hoarding of gas cylinders due to the Strait of Hormuz crisis. That is one example. Apart from that, also a mass panic and fear can spread if there is a false information spreading, that for example banking or financial systems, if information is spreading about the collapse of a particular bank, collapse of a particular financial institutions, or large scale corruption in a particular organization, for example, that can also cause a loss of trust of public on the banking and financial institutions, that can lead to a sudden withdrawal of money, that to some extent would cause economic impact, that is also directly tied up with the public order and the internal security of India. Apart from that, this can also be used to create a fear among the masses about the use of excessive force by the security forces against the public and all that. So that all of this can be example of how fake news and misinformation pose a threat to internal security and public order as such. Now discuss the salient features of amendments under Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules. This is a direct, straightforward question. So here several amendments were suggested. First of all was the role and responsibility that intermediary has toward the content, toward the regulation of content as such. Second amendment was largely referring to grievance addressal. Now there is an institutional grievance redressal for people and consumers. And third is grievance appellate committee. If some individual is not happy with the way how their grievances have been addressed, they can further appeal to the grievance appellate committee. 3 such grievance appellate committee as per the Ministry of Electronics Information Technology website already has been created as such. At the same time, government also has enforced the rule to regulate or ethically regulate the digital OTT platforms and digital media content and all that. So these were some points you could have written directly, that how government is trying to ensure that in the information technology that you have in India, the IT sector that you have in India, especially that has significantly expanded due to the rise of social media, due to the rise of OTT platforms and all that, could be properly regulated as such. But at the same time, in conclusion, you could have written that how a delicate balance has to be maintained, otherwise too much regulation can further stifle and can have a chilling effect on the free speech as such. So that's where we have to maintain a balance. This could have been a good conclusion. That's what you could have written in this particular question. Second question is directly related to the Ladakh region, where the question is that Ladakh is strategically located between China and Pakistan. As a measure to win the hearts and minds of locals, discuss the Border Area Development Program, BADP. It is a flagship scheme we have studied about in classes many times by the central government and civic actions by the army. So 2 things you have discussed. One is BADP, other is the civic action program that is launched by the security forces, including CAPF as well as army. Also discuss the demand for 6 scheduled provisions for Ladakh as such. So to some extent we can say it is a kind of lengthy question, multiple things you have to address. Now first mistake that students do is that they take the statement as just given. They do not talk about the statement. In this particular question, the best way to start the answer is that you talk briefly about this statement. What is the statement saying? Ladakh is strategically located between China and Pakistan. You can try to justify it, and you do not have to write a lot to justify it. You can simply draw the map of Jammu and Kashmir region and Ladakh region, and you can show that how this area is what you call as Pakistan occupied Kashmir, that is separated by line of control. Similarly, on this area, if you look, you have the Chinese occupied Kashmir, that is Aksai Chin region, that is separated by line of actual control, and in between this area lies the Union territory of Ladakh as such, somewhere in this area. So because of its unique location, where it is sandwiched between Pakistan occupied Kashmir and Chinese occupied Kashmir, and there is a we can call as a regular threat of attack that can commence from both of the side, or military aggression that you can see from both of the sides, ceasefire violations can be seen from both the side. Ladakh definitely becomes from security perspective a very important region, and also because of its location it is a strategic area as such. If you want to have control over the entire Jammu and Kashmir, having control over Ladakh, the important routes of Ladakh, can play a vital role. Now coming to the main topic, as a measure to win the hearts and minds of local, discuss the Border Area Development Program. Now in the classes we have discussed BADP, Border Area Development Program. In the beginning it was brought in largely to focus on the border areas of Pakistan, Indo-Pakistan border. Later on, due to the good results that it provided, it was expanded to cover almost all the international border of India, land border of India, that currently is covering almost 111 districts as such. So flagship scheme of the government, Ministry of Home Affairs. So Border Area Development Program by the central government. Now what is the, you have to discuss, you not have to critically examine, you simply have to write what is the perspective, objective of the Border Area Development Program. Now it has 2 major objectives. Within that you can then subdivide the answer into multiple subset. The first objective of Border Area Development Program is to focus on infrastructure development along the border areas. This infrastructure is not only the infrastructure in the sense of hard infrastructure, like for example roads, railways, bridges. It also talks about the economic infrastructure. It also talks about the social infrastructure. The social infrastructure, for example, examples can be educational institution, healthcare institutions. You have the village panchayats in certain areas, panchayat buildings and all that. Economic infrastructure, for example, that can provide job and employment opportunities to the people as such, like irrigation based infrastructure can be example of this. Roads, power line, telecommunication, these are the basic requirement that people need to have so they feel connected to the mainland of India even if they are living in the border areas. The second objective of this program was to instill a sense of security. This is very important. To instill a sense of security amongst the people who are residing along the border regions, because they are the one who are most vulnerable in case any war is started. And we have seen example of it in 1965, 1971 and even to some extent in 1999 war as such. So sense of security has to be instilled. That is again done by having proper development, so that people feel that if there is some threat, they can easily run away from the border areas, they have connectivity, they can save their life and all that, right? Apart from that, also they have to feel that in the case of need, due to better connectivity, they can communicate with the police, they can communicate with the army personnel, they can communicate with the security forces, and they can come to their rescue as soon as possible. This is how you can instill a sense of security. So to some extent, the second objective is dependent upon the fulfillment of first objective. Apart from that, also it talks about ensuring that people do not migrate away from the border areas. So we have to ensure that they remain in border areas. To make sure, we have to create job employment opportunities. For example, increasing number of tourist footfall in the areas can be example. Development of industries, like we are talking about the development of several industries, including new and renewable energy industries in the border areas and all. So that's what we had to discuss in this particular region. Then by the central government and civic action. Civic action basically is the way how to break the ice between civilian population and the army personnel. Because many times when army is doing the flag march or moving through a civilian areas, civilians are not very comfortable. They might get scared. They might not be able to come and share the information, which can play important role in gathering intelligence, or we can talk about understanding the enemy movement and the objectives and all that. So to break that ice, to bring or enhance cooperation between civilian and army, civic action program was launched. Under this action program, the army is not only involved in maintaining security along the border, but also they are providing help and support to local population. This can be as simple as providing drinking water facility in the village areas, repairing the schools that was degraded, or that was we can say that was in dilapidated conditions as such, maintenance and repairs of the road if it is kind of in a bad condition and all that, digging of tube wells, digging of this bore wells and all that, right? Community health, for example, screening of the health and all that can be done through the civic action program. So that overall creates a bonhomie, or whatever you can say, a more comfort among the masses toward the army. It also creates a positive image of army in the mind of people, and that can go a long way in increasing trust of the border people to the government and toward the army as such. That was the objective. Also discuss the demand for 6th schedule. So in Ladakh region, it has been now created as a separate union territory. First of all, you can discuss what is 6th schedule. That's how you could have addressed the next part of the question. So 6th schedule. What is 6th schedule? 6th schedule is a constitutional provision under which certain tribal areas are given a greater extent of autonomy to manage their cultural affairs, to manage their local custom, rules, laws and all that, largely to preserve their culture, which might be a risk from the we can say outside as such. Now, what is the demand? What is the reason behind the demand of 6th schedule in Ladakh? That several points you could have discussed. That Ladakh is a hill area. It is isolated region. The local community living there is a minority community that who are the followers of Buddhism as such. And at the same time, because Ladakh is becoming a favorite tourist hotspot for many people of India, even from outside of India, the people here fear that their culture might might face direct assault and attack and all that. They want to preserve their languages and all that, right? At the same time, Ladakh also has ecological fragility because it is the trans-Himalayan region, high Himalayan region, where any high this we can say footfall of tourists, over tourism we can say to some extent, over development to some extent we can say, can also lead to the decline in the decline in the overall status of life of people, right? So that's all things we can discuss. And also in the last we could have concluded by critically examine this particular point, that why 6th schedule should not cannot be provided to Ladakh. What is the limitations that the government is facing here? So that could have been a good question answer for this particular question. Third question is related to disaster management. Community participation is the cornerstone for effective disaster management, right? A statement is given to you by UPSC and you have to explain, basically analyze this statement with suitable examples from India. Second part is also discuss challenges to community participation and measures to strengthen it. Now see, this entire question can be split into three parts. First is you have to analyze the statement, right, with suitable examples. Second, discuss the challenges. And third, what are the measures that government can take to strengthen community participation in disaster management. So you can start your introduction by talking about disaster management. What do you understand by term disaster management as such? Why community participation is central idea in the disaster management as such? Now, when you talk about disaster, we know that it is directly a result of three things: hazard, then you have vulnerability. Greater the extent of hazard, higher the vulnerability of population, higher is the chance of disaster taking place there. So why community participation required? Several reasons are there, right? So positive, you can say positive effects or arguments in favor. What are the arguments you can give in favor of ensuring this community participation in disaster management? So first of all, community refers to the local people that would who would be present in the disaster struck area, disaster affected areas. They would be the first responder actually. Suppose a landslide has taken place at any place, so the NDRF, SDRF, the local police and all that, they would come later after disaster has taken place. The first responder would always be local population. They would have understanding about the this evacuation route. They would have understanding about the most vulnerable and sensitive areas where the extent of damage could be humongous in nature. So that's why they can provide first information to the responders, institutional responders such as NDRF, as well as they can help the people in carrying out rescue operation, in carrying out evacuation operation, even when the institutional support has not arrived there. That is the first point. Second is community participation would not only be helpful once disaster has struck a particular area, it would be helpful even in the pre-disaster cases, because when you do the mock drills, when you understand that if a disaster such as floods, such as landslide takes place in this region, what should be the response of community, how vulnerable population should be identified. So this can only be done if community participation is to a greater extent as such. Third, community participation can also play a very important role in framing the disaster management framework. Right, we have taken a kind of regional approach in disaster management when you talk about the National Disaster Management Act as such. So that regional approach cannot be properly articulated without the help of community as such. Examples we can give, multiple examples we have, like in the case of Kerala, Kudumbasri, that is self-help group, it has played an important role in ensuring that in the disaster proper and adequate support is provided to people. Right, apart from that also you have for example, Apada Mitra, that is a kind of concept where youth volunteers are being engaged who can play an active role in the both pre as well as post disaster situation and all that. Those some examples we could have written. Even recent examples we could have taken from the landslides that we have seen in the regions of the Uttarakhand, before that in Sikkim and all that. So to some extent community has played an important role, local community has played an important role in ensuring that damage to some extent is minimized. The cyclones of Odisha you can take easily as an example, where the community participation has ensured that even in the case of super cyclone, which is the strongest of cyclone, the human casualty is now much less compared to what it was couple of decades before. That largely to some extent, that we can attribute to community participation. Challenges to community participation, several challenges we can highlight. First is the lack of awareness. People are not aware how they can help and be proactive in disaster management. Second is also funding support. Many times government or the local institutions do not have proper fund to train the local volunteers, to hire the local volunteers, or to carry out even mock drills, for example. Third also is a lack of enthusiasm and interest, that to some extent again can be related to a kind of disconnect that exists between the government and the local population. Many times the masses is not clearly communicated by the government to local population. Many times there is some sort of what you can call as lack of harmony in how the work has to be done as such. So these are some of the challenges in community participation. Next is the measures to strengthen it. How would you strengthen community participation? So more outreach programs we can talk about. Okay, you can also bring in here the framework of Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction. It also talks about how community can play a very important role in ensuring that ensuring an effective disaster management as such. So measures to strengthen it, outreach programs. We can also talk about giving incentive to local village community. For example, at panchayat level, you can distribute funds kind of similar to disaster mitigation as well as disaster response fund. A part of that can be used to ensure that community participation can be enhanced or increased as such. You have to effectively communicate to people how community participation can be a significant deterrent against the adverse consequences that we face due to disaster and all. So these were some points that you could have written easily while you looking at the question for the first time as such. So that this could have been the content. Next is related to separatist movement have been one of the major factors contributing to militancy and instability in Jammu and Kashmir. Again, the question starts with the statement. So to some extent you have to justify this in the introduction part. Then bring out actions taken by the government to bring Jammu and Kashmir into the national mainstream. Discuss pre and post abrogation status of Article 370 and 35A along with the positive impact of change. Again, a question with multiple parts. First, this part. You have to briefly discuss about the statement. Second is bring out the actions taken by government, steps taken by government to bring J&K into national mainstream. Third part is this, where you have discussed how after the abrogation of 370 and 35A, what are the positive impact of the changes that we are witnessing. And finally, you can conclude the answer by giving a kind of positive view that how the Jammu and Kashmir seems to be coming more and more in the national mainstream and how this has played important role. So, first of all, separatist movement, you can start by explaining, rather than definition we can say explanation of the separatist movement. What is the separatist movement? Now see, here you have to ensure that you do not start your answer right from 1947, that how the separatism evolved in Jammu and Kashmir, the regions and all. That is not required here. When you talk about separatism, it simply means that the ideology or the objective with which a particular group is continuously working against the state to ensure that a particular geographical area is seceded or separated from the Union of India as such. That is what we can define as separatism in the context of India. As far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, we can see that a particular section of the population or a particular group, this can be terrorist group, or example you have militant groups such as Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, you can give an example. Their objective was to ensure that Jammu and Kashmir does not remain part of Indian Union. So that is what we can talk about the separatism movement. Now it is a separatism movement that has contributed to both militancy and instability. Why? Several reasons. First of all, because of the separatism, what we see, there is a security crisis. People are fearful of the separatist. People are this security crisis we can say. Right? We are talking about the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits that has taken place and all that. So a kind of security crisis was seen where neither the local police forces nor the central agencies were able to provide any help, okay, at least in the short term. Second, we can talk about how it has contributed to instability, because now you have a security crisis. That means youth are not able to get adequate job and employment. Because of the lack of job and employment, what will happen? They also would be forced and migrate to what you can call as destructive activities. That's why we have seen participation in the destructive activities where they have been involved in stone pelting, where they have been involved in illegal activities, where they have been even gone and joined the terrorist groups such as Jaise Muhammad, Hizbul Mujahideen, right? You have the Lashkar-e-Taiba and all that. So to large extent, this is also a kind of crisis that we are facing. Now because of the security crisis, obviously tourism, because in Jammu Kashmir, one of the major area where a lot of employment and job can be provided, where a lot of revenue can be generated is tourism. So obviously tourists would never flock to the areas, or if they go, they will go in very less number to the areas where they might not feel safe, where there is a continuous risk of being harmed or killed as such, as we have seen in the case of the earlier Pahalgam attack also. So these all reasons we can list out why they are the major factors contributing to militancy. Separatist movement at the same time, you can also bring in other angle if you want, is that it is linked very strongly with the cross-border terrorism, because the separatism in Jammu and Kashmir, their success to large extent was also critical for the legitimacy of the Pakistan military, and that's why Pakistan military as well as Pakistan ISI have clearly funded the cross-border terrorism by helping and supporting the several terrorist organizations such as again Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaise Muhammad and Hizbul Mujahideen. Now bring out the actions taken by government, so that again we can list it out, we can divide. When you are writing a good answer, make sure that you ensure that multiple dimensions are covered here. So first you can talk about what are the security related efforts that government has made. So counter-insurgency operation, deployment of the Central Armed Police Forces along with the Indian Army, Rashtriya Rifles we have seen, right? Second, we can talk about is the development related efforts. So a lot of development programs government has recently unveiled. So Udan scheme, for example, you can talk about. Regional connectivity scheme you can talk about. Third is governance related effort, where Article 370 and 335A was abrogated to bring Jammu and Kashmir and the people of Jammu and Kashmir more closer to the mainstream India, to unite them, to integrate with the Union of India as such. So security effort, development effort, governance effort, political effort also you can talk about, how outreach program was carried out, how the local state government legislature were taken into confidence before making any large scale changes on all these kind of things as such. So in various dimensions you could have split your answer into national mainstream, right? Economic efforts also you can talk about, how a large scale funding is now being provided, that is going in the or that is being we can say spended in a fruitful ventures such as development of infrastructure, development of economic infrastructure, social infrastructure, right? You have the roads, railways and all that. Recent big projects you can discuss. We have the first in the Ladakh region, in the Puga Valley, we have the what you can call as the first geothermal energy plant that has been established. Then we can also talk about the Riyasi Bridge, the tallest railway bridge structure that we have. Many tunnels we are building to provide all-weather connectivity. Example you can talk about is the Jojula tunnel, Jojula Pass and all that. So that could have been the steps taken. Then discuss pre and post abrogation status. So how positive impact is being seen. So obviously security crisis that earlier Jammu and Kashmir was facing. So to some extent we can say, to large extent actually, security situation has improved in the valley. That has resulted in the increase in number of tourist footfall. If you remove the Pahalgam as a Pahalgam attack as an exception, then overall in last 5 to 6 years we have definitely had seen increase in the demand for Kashmir holiday packages and all that. So security situation improved, increase in tourism now means more job and employment opportunities is being provided. That means youth participation is seen in the positive areas, right? Youth participation is seen in the development effort and all that, rather than engaging in the this what you can call as the anti-national or illegal activities and all that. So youth participation increase, that means overall to large extent we can say the situation, social situation would also improve as such. People would not live in fear anymore. People have begun to live in a kind of environment, an air of freedom as such, right? They are happy in the Jammu and Kashmir because now they have access to resources, access to opportunities, access to critical and basic infrastructure and all that. So these are some of the positive impact of the changes we could have easily mentioned as far as the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A is concerned. Also we could have written that abrogation is not only by bringing Jammu and Kashmir geographically closer to Union of India, or we can say politically closer, constitutionally closer to Union of India, but also it was an attempt to bring the people, their mind much more closer to the Union of India as such. That's how we could have written this particular answer. Now next question is, discuss the counterfeit currency and money laundering. So we have discussed about financial crimes in the syllabus. So discuss counterfeit currency and money laundering as a major sources of terror funding in India. State the actions being taken at the international level to check these menaces. Highlight the role of FATF and methods of compliance by its member countries in preventing terror funding. Again, multiple questions you have in the same question. So discuss how counterfeit currency and money laundering can be a major source of terror funding in India. So both of these you can easily explain. First of all, explain what is counterfeit currency. So fake Indian currency note that largely comes across the border of Bangladesh and Nepal and believed to be printed in Pakistan has been a major source of fund for every extremist element in India, whether it is Naxals in the central India, whether it is the insurgency in the northeastern India, or whether it is the militants and the terrorist organizations operating across the Pakistan occupied Kashmir or in Jammu and Kashmir as such. So how? Because it helps in creating a kind of shadow or parallel economy. It creates an underground network of buyers and sellers where trafficking of drugs, trafficking of weapon, and even to some extent animal and human trafficking is done to fulfill the requirements of the extremist groups. For example, arms and all that we have discussed. Third, we can also talk about how money laundering. What is money laundering? You have to briefly describe. It is conversion of black money into white money, or transforming dirty money into clean money to be used and integrated in the national economy. So it passes through 3 stages you have talked about. One is the placement stage, other is the layering stage, and third we could have discussed about is the integration stage. So basically the black money that you have either created due to the evasion of taxes or generated as a result of this federal offences, for example, illegal activities, for example, right? So those are what we call as black money. So black money, because tax is not paid on them, it is taken out from the national resource as such, and then that money which could have which could have been used for paying taxes, which government of India could have used for productive activity, is now being funneled to promote and to support the anti-national activities, the illegal extremist activities and all that. So once it is integrated, then basically we can say it can be used in the national economy as well. So that is how counterfeit currency and money laundering can be a major source of terror funding in India. Such examples we could have talked about how Hawala transaction that is carried out in the overall money laundering has been a major source of funding for the extremist element. When we talk about Naxals, so first major source of funding for Naxals is obviously they are extorting money, but apart from that also they generate huge amount of money, or they used to generate huge amount of money from the hawala transactions and all that. So to some extent Pakistan link also can be established here. In India, state the actions being taken at international level. So again you have to be brief here. You can talk about the UN initiatives. So UN Office on Counter-Terrorism is one of the major international effort in this area. You can also talk about UN Office on Drug and Organized Crime. They have taken several steps. You can also talk about United Nations Security Council. They have sanctioned many of the individual terrorists as well as terror organizations to that extent. And apart from that, we can also discuss how at the international level the discussion is continuously being made related to anti-money laundering and against the financing of this terrorism as such, right? So these points we would have written here at international level to check these menaces. You can also discuss regional cooperation. For example, BRICS, they have brought an agreement to cooperate on the areas of organized crime and terrorism as such. You can also talk about SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They have created regional anti-terrorism structure, RATS Council, which also is directly linked with checking these menaces, financing of terrorism and all that. Then next is you had to highlight FATF, very important organizations. So FATF was created by G7 countries to tackle the menace of terror financing, right? So highlight the role of FATF. So FATF, it plays a very crucial role because it comes up with the AML norms, anti-money laundering norms, that each and every country has to fulfill. The legislation, its policy, the country's policy should be as per the AML provisions and all that. It also talks about CFT, combating and financing of terrorism as such. So prohibiting it also is one of the major aspects here. FATF also helps countries in framing the policies and guidelines that is in congruence with the anti-money laundering, global anti-money laundering measures as such. FATF also every now and then periodically holds meeting where it assesses and analyzes the steps taken by several countries against money laundering, against organized crime, and then decides whether more effort is required. If yes, in which direction country should work upon. And later on, at the most important point is that if a country is not taking suitable or adequate action to combat money laundering and terror financing, in that case FATF also has the power at its disposal. It can put country in a grey list as a warning. So grey list, Pakistan has been put under grey list many times. So grey list act as a warning. Even if after being put in the grey list, if a country does not mend its ways, then it can be put under blacklist, which is economic suicide for a country, financial suicide for a country, because it is akin to sanction. A strong economic sanctions can be imposed on these countries. Any international financial institution would not be willing to work with the countries put in the grey list or blacklist. At the same time, getting loans or funding support from the IMF, World Bank can be extremely tricky if they are in the grey list or blacklist. So these act as a punitive measures, how FATF can ensure that its members are able to comply with the AML norms, anti-money laundering norms, and combating of finance terrorism norm as such. India has been a full-fledged member of FATF. This we could have put in the conclusion, and India's efforts, its policy, its legislation to counter money laundering has always been to some extent praised by the FATF as soon as in the recent meetings itself as such. So these were some of the questions that were asked on the internal security and disaster management. Overall, we can say question was not very hard or difficult as such. Question were to some extent in the easy to moderate, we can say, level, and you could easily have answered them if you have revised all the topics and subtopics mentioned there, and if you have been able to bring in some examples from the current affairs and all that. Overall, the pattern was similar to what we had seen for this particular subject, at least in the previous years of UPSC Mains examination. That's all for this particular video. Thank you very much.